Washington and Spokane voters are famously independent, voting for the person and not the party. Voters want to know the person behind the policy. Join host Sulani Madsen as she interviews 2016 general election candidates for local, state, and federal office on the experiences that have shaped their lives. The Meet the Candidate series is sponsored as a community service by the Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, the Law Office of D.C. Cronin, and We Believe, We Vote. Now, here's your host, Sulani.
So welcome to Meet the Candidate, and my guest for this session is Bill Bryant, candidate for governor.
Thank you for having me today.
Glad you could join us in the studio in Spokane here. Well, the first question I give to all the candidates is to please describe the responsibilities and duties of the office.
Well, I'm running for governor, and I think the most important responsibility of a governor is to articulate a vision for the state over the next 10 years. And we have a governor right now who is not providing any vision and is actually left the state rather rudderless. And that's causing problems for people who are in need of mental health care. It's causing problems for people who are looking for work. It's causing problems for those who want to restore salmon runs across the board, or kids. We have a situation where 25% of our ninth graders are not graduating from high school. Mm-hmm. And I think all of these issues can stem back from the lack of vision and leadership. So the first thing a governor needs to do is identify exactly where he or she thinks the state should be in 10 years. And then how do you take the regulatory power of the state and the budget of the state and use it in a way that helps the private sector move towards those objectives in terms of job generation or education or ensuring we have the transportation infrastructure we need to generate family wage jobs in the private sector? This governor's not doing that. That's the kind of leadership I'd like to bring to the office.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about the background that shapes the worldview that you bring to that leadership. Your formal education started at let me see. I'm trying to remember. I've heard the story. Where did your formal education start?
In terms of university?
No. I think grade school and growing up
school.
times.
So I went to school. I grew up over in Hoodsport on the coast in the Olympic Peninsula. Dad taught school in the Hood Canal School District, and the school was actually on the Skokomish Reservation. To give you an idea of what kind of house I grew up in a house in the early 1960s that had 2 TVs. This was at a time when all of our neighbors only had 1 TV, and a few neighbors still didn't have TVs, but we had 2. One was about 3 by 3 and 3 feet deep, and it had a picture, and the other one was about 1 by 1, and it had sound, and they were both hand-me-down TVs, so neither had knobs, and my sister and I would have to change the channel with pliers and experiment to make sure we got both sets on the same channel. But I grew up with, Dad had, he taught, he coached, and he had a job on Saturdays. Mom was a banquet waitress at the local resort, and it was often hard. And I remember a lot of nights where Dad would come home after working 1 or 2 jobs just in time for Mom to leave. And I hated those nights when the family wasn't together. And I think it's because of those very young experiences that I know many of our working poor are not lazy. Mm-hmm. They merely lack opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the governor likes to talk about how he's created 200,000 jobs. Well, he hasn't created any jobs, but 200,000 jobs have been generated in the state. But those are all primarily in the urban core, over in Bellevue and Seattle. You get outside of Bellevue and Seattle, and those communities are still struggling with unemployment, and there are people there who want opportunities. We have the 9th highest unemployment in America. Washington State is tied with Mississippi, and we need a governor who can look at the entire state, not just the urban core. And the fact that I grew up on the coast, but then I moved to Yakima after college, and I lived in central Washington, and Barbara and I have a place over here in eastern Washington as well. My family, my brother lives here in Spokane. We have deep roots in central and eastern Washington, and Barbara grew up in southwest Washington. That's going to give us a perspective on ensuring that all of Washington is represented by the governor and not just the real urban area.
Okay. So what's given you this perspective on long-term planning? You emphasize that a lot in your talks. What's shaped your worldview that's led you to look at that long-term thinking?
Well, I really learned that when I worked for the apple industry. After college, I moved to Yakima, and I did international trade work, opening up new export markets for Washington's apples, pears, and cherries all over the world. The industry hired me when we were producing 35 million boxes of apples in Washington State, and they knew the crops were going to get bigger. They didn't wait until they had bigger crops to hire me. They hired me before they needed those markets. And they knew they had to have those markets if they were going to sell these increasingly large crops. And they taught me that you need to be looking 4, 7, and 10 years out. You need to make sure that what you're planting today is what you want to harvest in 4 or 7 years. And in 1992, I moved over to the coast to Seattle and set up my own company doing international trade work for agriculture. And that's the first lesson I applied, was looking at where I wanted my company to be in 4, 7, and 10 years. And when I ran for a seat in the King County Seattle Port Commission, again, I was looking at where the port needed to be in 7 or 10 years in order to be globally competitive and keep jobs in Washington State. That's a perspective we don't have in Olympia right now. And in the absence of having a 10-year idea of where you want the state agencies to be and how they can work with the private sector to generate jobs all across the state over those 10 years, what you do is you reduce the budget to a political document that is just whatever you need to do to get 25 votes in the Senate and 50 in the House and that the governor is willing to sign, when really a budget should be a document that's moving you towards a specific 10-year goal. At least I think it should be. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of longer-term vision that I'd like to bring to the office.
Okay. You did mention your formal education. You understand you went to Georgetown University and you met a mentor there.
I did. Very early on, I think I've told you the story, I arrived in Georgetown's campus in the late 70s wearing a cowboy hat and plaid shirt, and I kind of stood out among all these kids who had prepped in New England. And this one priest really took an interest in my education and really drilled me on books and things that were beyond my curriculum and became a mentor, and then after college, a real mentor and friend. He married my wife and me, and he died 12 years ago. It was a huge factor in my life. He would come out once for a week or two, or every summer for a week or two, and the last time he came out, we were up in the Okanagan, and we were on a hike, and he stopped at one point and clearly wanted me to pay attention to him, and he said, and I did not know I would never see him again, and he said, "Bill, at the end of your life, all the stuff you've been able to buy won't matter. So at the end of your days, the only thing that's going to matter are the lives you've touched and the community you've built." And that has resonated with me ever since, and it is why I'm running for governor.
Okay. Now you've had some international experience with the trade. You've traveled internationally as well and learned something from those experiences?
Yeah, I've been fortunate working with the apple industry and then with a lot of other agricultural groups around the United States and doing a lot of their work around the world, that I've been able to travel broadly. But even before I went to work for the apple industry, I lived in Brazil as an exchange student in high school when Brazil was run by a military dictatorship. And then before working for the apple industry, took off for 4 months. I worked for Governor Spellman doing international trade work, and after he lost, before going to work for the apple industry, I took off 4 months and went backpacking alone through China and Tibet. This is when China was still behind the curtain, and you really couldn't get into China as an individual. You had to be in an approved tour group. But I found this way in Hong Kong, kind of to sneak through the border. And it was the experience of living in a very totalitarian regime, and China at the time was a very Stalinist totalitarian regime, and also having lived in Brazil under the dictatorship, that really has led me to believe that I do not want the government telling me how to live my life. And I have some very personal views as a Catholic on some social issues, but I know any government that can force my religion on other people is a government that can force someone else's religion on me. And those years of living under a very oppressive government has shaped how I look at the role of government.
Okay. Well, Bill, we're coming up on that last 2 minutes that I said I'd save for you to answer the question directly. Why vote for Bill Bryant for Washington State Governor?
Well, if you would like a governor who wants to focus on ensuring that every kid has an equal chance to get ahead, and I think that comes from the background that I had, then I'm the person you want to vote for. Education is incredibly important to me. I got a good education in the public school system in a very rural community. But today, too often, the quality of an education a kid gets depends on their zip code or their school district. And that's not only unconstitutional, but it's morally wrong. We live in a state that is leaving behind about a quarter of our kids. About a quarter of our ninth graders will not finish high school. That's wrong. We need to have a governor who can put together an education system that not only ensures that we're spending enough and that we're spending it equitably, but that we're meeting the needs of a diverse 21st century student body. We need to take this McCleary decision, which is forcing us to make some decisions about funding and how we fund schools, and look at it as an opportunity to have a discussion about what a 21st century public school system looks like. As your governor, I'll do that. We also need to recognize that while certain areas are growing, in terms of the economy, there are a lot of communities around Washington State that are still suffering. And I understand that because I grew up in small towns around Washington State. As I said, we have the 9th highest unemployment in the country. If you want a governor who's going to not just represent the urban core, but also communities all across Washington, and make sure that we're generating private sector jobs in those communities, then I'm the person you want to vote for.
All right. Very well said. Nice conclusion, and Godspeed on your campaign journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
You bet.
Meet the Candidate is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. The Meet the Candidate series is sponsored as a community service by the Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, the Law Office of D.C. Cronin, and We Believe, We Vote. All Meet the Candidate conversations are posted on our YouTube channel, posted as a podcast on our website, and will be featured in our 24/7 live stream. Find us at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.